my name is Thomas. I've been working for now a bit more than 5 years, leading a software agency and marketing company, helping companies mostly outside China enter the Chinese market. And we've been working with a lot of brands, which include some big brands like Xiaomi, Cisco, McLaren, Nestle, Bosch, etc. But also with some very small brands, which I think could be interesting too, to a lot of people participating, because we helped a lot of smaller brands launch in China. And before that, I was doing some stuff not very interesting. I was doing consulting and studying. I won't bore you with my life story. So what we're going to talk about today, is we're in the middle of a pandemic, so I would be remiss if I don't talk a bit about it. I will talk about how China is reacting to the pandemic in terms of e-commerce market and how it's been impacting the sales in various industries. So you can get a sense of what is the situation today in China in terms of e-commerce, given the presence of the pandemic in the world. So then I will dive right into different more specific marketing topic. We'll talk about WeChat marketing. We'll talk about Douyin marketing, Douyin being the Chinese version of TikTok. We'll talk about Kuaishou marketing, and we'll talk about Tmall Oversea Fulfillment. So of course, given the fact that we aim to finish that within an hour, I won't be able to treat these topics completely exhaustively. What I try to do is, rather than being superficial, I try to deep dive on some specific aspects of the platforms which are especially interesting. So for instance, for WeChat, I will talk mostly about influencer marketing on WeChat, because I believe that's the most interesting feature today in terms of e-commerce marketing. And I won't deep dive in all of the other ways to advertise on WeChat, because I think they are less efficient. And I will do that for each platform. I will try to point out the main features of each platform and the main characteristics and the main strategies you can use. And I won't try to be exhaustive. Maybe later we'll have specific presentations on WeChat marketing, on Douyin marketing, on Kuaishou marketing. Each of these can last for easily 1 to 2 hours if we are trying to go very much in depth. But right now, this is more of an overview to guide you and give you a sense of what could be interesting next. I'll just quickly check in the chat. People introducing themselves. Good. So I'll start talking about the COVID-19 and the impact it had on China. So we can see that the China e-commerce market started to recover very early from the COVID-19 epidemic. Actually, as early as the second half of February, you could already see a shift into consumer behavior. Consumers started to be willing to spend more on leisure spending, on things which were not essential necessities. And this started very fast. So the peak of the epidemic was really between January 15th and February 15th. And after that, you could see people starting to relax. You can see that if you start looking at e-commerce sales. So as early as the middle of March, you can see that the e-commerce sales of a lot of big e-commerce brands, big brands, started to bounce back and started to be much bigger than they were the previous year. So brands like Nike, Estée Lauder, Lancôme, and some more local companies like Perfect Diary or Three Squirrels. Perfect Diary is the largest cosmetic brand, beauty brand in China, the Chinese beauty brand, and the Three Squirrels is a very large F&B brand in China. All of them performed better than in March last year, and this was as early as March. So very early, we could see that the e-commerce market in China was very resilient and started to bounce back. This was in part helped by the March 8th promotions. March 8th is a very important shopping festival in China, and this created a big boost of sales, which put a lot of brands back into the way to growth and pushed a lot of customers to get back to a more common pattern of purchasing. So this was early March. And if you look at by the end of March, this is data from our own system. So these are the merchants who are selling through WeChat through our system. You can see that in December, we got a 16% year-on-year growth rate. So this was just organic growth for our merchants due to the fact that the WeChat e-commerce got more a bit hotter, the influencers got bigger, Double 12 became a bigger shopping festival. So this was the baseline before the pandemic. Then in January 2020, we saw a 48% decrease year over year. So this was the epidemic peak. In February, 31% decrease. So this was mostly due to the first half of February, which was very tough. By late February, things had improved already significantly. And by the month of March, we saw a 24% increase of sales for our merchants year over year. And the month of April is going to be much better than that, at least 50% increase year over year from the data we see so far. So big rebound of e-commerce. The first 2 months of the pandemic were impacted all sectors, and we have a lot of fashion and cosmetics merchants. So these were definitely impacted by the peak of the pandemic. But as you can see, we're already past the point of recovery, and we're already seeing very solid growth year over year, which is actually faster growth than before the pandemic in terms of e-commerce. And this happened even though merchants decreased their investment for various reasons. First, because they were worried to spend too much during the peak of the pandemic in China, and later because the cash flows were more restricted. A lot of our merchants have international exposure, so they are being impacted by the pandemic in multiple ways, and their cash flows outside China, of course, are not as good as usual. So it's harder for them to invest in marketing, but still we're seeing this growth. Another impact is that, of course, as you might expect, during the pandemic, people started spending more time online. This was back in February, so this was at the peak of the pandemic in China. These effects have now been noticed in other countries, which since then have been touched by the COVID-19. And this has led to a decrease in advertising cost because it has increased the inventory for a lot of platforms. And for some types of WeChat advertising, we could see the advertising cost being divided by 3 compared to before the COVID-19 outbreak. And a lot of these effects are long lasting because even if advertising cost has risen a bit since then, there is still much more online exposure today, including in China, than there was before, because some people are still staying more indoors than they used to, and they took more newer habits of digital usage. So we can see a clear decrease of advertising costs today on most platforms, including WeChat, Douyin, etc. So this is a rough overview of the quantitative effects. There are also some qualitative effects. As things started to get better, a lot of brands started to launch digitally in China. Large luxury brands in particular have decided to move online. So the Prada Group, for instance, launched 2 stores for 2 brands during the month of March, one for Prada, one for Miu Miu, and they gathered dozens of thousands of followers within a few days of launch, which shows that there is really some optimism in terms of how much Chinese customers are willing to buy. There is also some realization that the consumption pattern is not going to go back to what it was. People are not going to go back to offline shopping as fast as some people would hope, and therefore there is need for to switch channels because the consumption is just not happening where it used to happen. Now, other brands such as BMW, Tesla, IKEA all launched Tmall stores since the COVID-19 epidemic. So there was a huge increase in willingness for brands to go towards online adoption. Of course, all people now have their eyes on the next shopping festivals. The months of May, June, July are going to be very high in sales because of the rebound of China. That's especially for e-commerce sales. And everybody in particular is looking at the June 18th festival, which is a very big media sale for Tmall, and which is going to be quite significant in terms of e-commerce sales. And people are starting to prepare for it. So people are preparing for it in different ways. One is, as we said, advertising costs have decreased. So a lot of brands are leveraging this low advertising cost in order to gain followers. People are engaging in product seeding, so gifting products to key opinion customers in order to generate mentions and reviews in preparation for the festival. And they are planning campaigns as early as now. So right now we see a lot of top influencers being booked well into the month of May until end of May. And it's quite important to start planning these campaigns early, because inventory is going very fast. There was low demand for influencers at the top of the epidemic, but now there is very, very high demand. Brands are comfortable spending again, and they know that China is going to be big in terms of their recovery plan if their sales have decreased in Europe and US. So a lot of brands right now are investing very, very heavily into influencer marketing. So if you are planning to do something for the month of June, you have to do it now and start preparing now. So this was about it for COVID-19. Now I'm gonna go more into platforms. I'm gonna quickly check the question panel, which is quite full already. I have some questions about live streaming. This I will bring up later in the presentation. And I answered the question about when do I expect year-to-date sales to surpass the same time 2019. This already happened in March. Yeah, that's I think the main questions I can see here. And can you start to sell on WeChat with a mini program? Yes, I will talk about that. So I keep going. I pick up some more of these questions, but right now there is nothing really burning or nothing that I won't address later in the presentations. So I will just keep going because most of these questions are going to be answered later. Oh yeah, one question, 1.2, you will all receive this presentation by email. So you don't need to take screenshots. You will receive exactly this presentation. So no need to, you can just focus on the presentation itself, don't need to screenshot anything. So first, before I dive into the platform themselves, I just want to give a bit of update on the balance between the different platforms and how they've been competing with each other. So if you look at the evolution of the digital spending between 2015 and 2019, you can see there is a huge move between different platforms. So in particular, there is one platform which is losing the game, and it's Baidu. So Baidu lost half of its market share in 4 years. So that's why I won't talk at all about Baidu today. It's not a growing platform, and it's one which is not being used in China the way Google is being used in the West. So a lot of people when they look for products outside China, they would go to Google. In China, they would go directly to platforms like Tmall or Taobao. And that's why you can see that one platform which has been consistently strong is Alibaba, which went from 21% to 29% of advertising budgets in 4 years, because it is the place where most people are going to buy at the end of the day. It's a very expensive platform to set on. If you are trying to set a store on Tmall, it costs around $1 million of investment for the first year if you want to set up a flagship. We'll talk later about how you can start on Tmall in a cheaper approach. But it's the one where most of the sales happen. You have Tencent, which went from 8% all the way up to 13%, but now is decreasing. The reason for that is that they are seeing competition from ByteDance. And you have ByteDance, which is the company which owns TikTok. The Chinese version of TikTok is called Douyin. We'll talk a lot about it later in the presentation. And which also owns another application called Tmall, which is another interesting platform. I won't talk about it too much today because it's mostly efficient if you're trying to sell things like advertised games or things like this. It's not very efficient for e-commerce, but still an interesting platform to share content. And these platforms have been growing very fast. And between in 4 years, ByteDance went from 2% to 18% of the total advertising spend in China, and is still growing very fast. So if you look at a few platforms today, you can look at WeChat. So you all heard about WeChat. We talk more about it. It's the largest social network in China and messaging platform in China. It has almost 800 million daily active users. But as you can see, the number of daily active users is actually decreasing year over year slightly by 0.3%. It's a very slight decrease, but it shows that there is a loss of momentum of WeChat. So their retention is very high. The amount of time spent on the platform is very high, but it's a platform which basically has reached its peak. It's kind of saturated the market. It's still very much there, but it's not a booming platform anymore. And then you have short video platforms, the ones we'll talk about much more during this presentation, Douyin and Kuaishou. And these platforms have seen year-on-year increase around 160%, reaching both 400 million and 300 million daily active users. And these people are spending a lot of time on the platforms, 88 minutes for Douyin every day, and 71 minutes per day on Kuaishou. So we're talking about platforms which are already very large, about half the size of WeChat in terms of daily active users, with similar levels of engagement, sometimes higher level of engagement in the case of Douyin, and which are still growing very, very fast. So that's why they occupy a very big part of the presentation today. So I'll start with WeChat, because it's the biggest platform and the one you might be most familiar with. So it has around 1.15 billion monthly active users, more than 1 million WeChat mini programs created on the platform. And as we said, people spend 82 minutes per day on the app. And it's complicated to explain. It's an ecosystem of services, right? It includes messaging, social, payments. And it also has a very vibrant influencer ecosystem. We'll talk a bit more about how you can leverage this to promote your brand. So as we said, it's growing, but it's growing in terms of monthly active users, decreasing in terms of daily active users. But even the monthly active users growth is not explosive. You can see this curve is a very flat curve. And over the last couple of years, there was a slight increase from 900 million to a bit more than 1 billion monthly active users, but it's not the explosive growth that we could see a few years ago. As we said, it contains 3 main sections. One is a chat interface, which is similar to what you might have on Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp. You have Moments, which is kind of similar to the Facebook timeline. And you have the wallet, which contains people linked to payments and e-commerce services. I won't spend too much time describing the superficial aspects of WeChat because I want to dive more into marketing. So, and I will assume that some of you are maybe familiar with it, but if you're not, that's what you have to know. It has 3 sections: payments, messaging, and social timeline. The brands actually, unlike Facebook, appear on the chat interface of WeChat. So they appear as messaging. So when a brand, especially account called service accounts, which are the most visible accounts on WeChat, sends out a message to a user, then it appears as if a friend was sending a message to this user. So it's very, very visible. It appears at the same place as the groups or the one-on-one conversation that users might have with their friends. There is another type of account which is less visible. It's in this blue folder you can see on the screen called subscription account. In this case, these accounts can send more messages. They can send one message per day, but people have to click inside this folder to see these messages. The service accounts, which are more visible, appear as a friend, but they can send only 4 messages per month, which is so about 1 per week on average. I won't detail that too much because I really want to go into the marketing part, promotion part. But this is a general idea. You have a chat interface where brands can send out messages. 2 types of accounts. One is which is more visible, but which has smaller number of messages, only 4 messages per month, and one which is less visible because it's in this hidden folder. So people have to open it to see all of the subscriptions. But it has more messages. It can send 1 push notification every day. And these accounts can link to what's called WeChat mini programs, which very often are e-commerce experiences. So from these e-commerce experiences, people can purchase products. And because these mini programs are hosted by WeChat, they're extremely fast within WeChat. People are automatically log in when they access them by WeChat. They can pay via WeChat payment. And this makes it very easy to take a user who's inside an influencer campaign, so reading an article, and then within 1 click, we'll be able to open one of these mini programs and complete a purchase. There is basically just 4 or 5 clicks you have to do to go from reading an article to completing a purchase, because you will open the mini program, you will click on buy now, you will click on in 1 click to get your address, where the mini program can retrieve your address directly stored within WeChat. And then you click payment, you'll do a face recognition or other type of payment, and you will be done. So it's only a few clicks between being introduced a product by an influencer to purchasing it. And this is the power of WeChat in terms of influencer marketing, is that it enables this integration between mini programs and content, between influencers and purchases. So that's why when we work on WeChat for marketing, we mostly work through influencers. The life cycle of influencers is the one you might be familiar with by working on other platforms like Instagram. We identify influencers, we give products. This gift generate free exposure. And then depending on the good KOLs who provided good free exposure, or who really like the product, or sometimes whom we know have very high conversion rates, we can arrange a paid campaigns, which generally is followed by some post-campaigns exposure. I will explain later how to select influencers for this type of campaigns. So the cost per impressions for WeChat is extremely high. It's around 1 RMB per impression, actually a bit more than that. So in order to get 1,000 influencer impressions on WeChat, you would have to pay around 1,100 RMB, which is around $150. So the cost for the same amount of impressions on TikTok, on Douyin, which is a Chinese version of TikTok, would be around 15 times cheaper. So it can seem, when you look at this data, that WeChat is a bad deal when it comes to influencers. That's not the case, because in practice, the average order amount on WeChat is much higher than on Douyin, even for similar conversion rates. So in practice, if you want to sell a product which is very cheap, 1 to 200 RMB, you will be able to do so via Douyin. But if you want to sell a product which might be much more expensive, all the way up to thousands of dollars, then you'll have to look into the direction of WeChat, because the Douyin users are just not gonna buy products which are so expensive. The target customer also is much wider on WeChat because it has a much higher penetration rate inside the population. You can reach people who might be all the way up to 60 years old, but on Douyin you will most likely not reach people much older than 25, 28, because the core of the population on Douyin is a young population. If you sell on WeChat, you'll be able to sell via WeChat mini programs where you won't pay any commission. to the platform. If you sell on Douyin, you will have to go to either a store created inside Douyin or through a link to a Tmall or Taobao stores. And this will cost an additional 2% to 10% commission you have to pay to the platform. I will explain later how this is charged. And in April, so for the first half of April, the average order on our platforms for our merchants was around 2,000 RMB. So around 287 US dollars. And you will see when we compare to Douyin that this is quite high, in fact, compared to the average order you might have on platforms like TikTok or Kuaishou. So the first step, as I said, working with WeChat is to do seeding. So, and this can really lead to very high, very measurable results. So the way we usually measure the impact of seeding is by looking at the equivalent price we would pay if we had to pay for the same placement on the same influencer on a paid campaign. And usually the return is very high. So this is an example for one of our clients, Côté Ciel. And the price of the paid mention would be around 20,000 RMB if we paid for it. But we get it for free by gifting the product and by having a good fit between the influencer and the product. For another of our clients, Hunter Boots in the UK, they got around 100,000 RMB, so $15,000 worth of free promotion by gifting 20 products in a month, because a lot of the influencers really resonated with the product and decided to post about it. And 3 million free impressions on WeChat and Weibo through this product gifting. So when you think of the cost for the brand of gifting a product, which might be as a cost for the brand less than 100 US dollars, and by gifting 20 of them, getting this level of exposure and promotion, it is actually very, very profitable. It does not lead to direct sales, usually because of the way the seeding is done. You get a lot of exposure and mentions, but you're going to have this exposure on platform which often are not sales driven. So it is more of a PR, and it needs to be followed by a more paid campaign. Very often we do seeding on platforms like Xiaohongshu, so Little Red Book or Red, and people don't buy directly on these platforms very often. So it's perfect to get the word out about the brand, not for sales. For sales, we need these campaigns, these gifting campaigns, to be followed by influencer campaigns, paid influencer campaigns. So as I said, after we done with the seeding, we would usually pay an influencer to talk about the brand. So this is a relatively quite small campaign, 6,000 US dollars for a new brand of merino wool sneakers called Giswine. And this campaign led to 30,000 US dollars of sales, so a 500% return on investment. To be completely transparent, 500% ROI is quite rare. Usually for a brand with a good product market fit, we aim for a consistent ROI on average around 230 to 250%, which is already quite good. 500% would be the top of the spectrum. And if the brand has a good product market fit with China, we try to not have campaigns below 100%, so that at least we get in sales what we spent on the influencer, and at best we get 5 times what we spent. And there is huge variance, of course, depending on the fit with the influencer, the specific campaign, the timing, the discount which is provided, the pricing, etc. Another new trend on WeChat is live streaming. So at a very small scale compared to what you might have on Taobao and Tmall, but this can be very profitable campaigns because usually you can have cost per sale campaign. So this is a tiny campaign we did with a very relatively small influencer. It was her first live stream, but during the first live stream, she generated 319 conversions with a conversion rate around 2.4%. So pretty decent conversion rate on the live stream, quite a high number of products sold. Very often live streams work better with cheaper items compared to articles. So the average order on this live stream was quite low. It was around 250 RMB, around 35 US dollars. So what are the elements if you want to do a successful live stream? We'll talk a bit more about it later. But one of the things is to provide a large choice of items within one category. So if it's just one brand, one item, it will be quite boring, and you will most likely struggle to keep people engaged through the length of a live stream, which very often is at least 30 minutes to up to 2 hours. You have to preview before the live stream, so here some hero items which will be discounted. So if you have within your live stream a product that you know people will want, and where the discount is going to be maybe a bit higher than usual, so people are going to wait for this discount so that they can buy this product. Don't put it at the beginning, of course, because otherwise people are just going to look at it and then click out. So you have to have some kind of reward for people to stay till the end. You also need to keep users engaged during the live stream. So whatever promotion you provide during the live stream should only apply to a fraction of the users, so that people have the incentive to stay awake and to be ready to click on the discount and buy right away. So you might have a discount which only applies for a certain amount of time, but preferably for a certain number of users. So you can try to anticipate the number of participants in your live stream, and when you provide a discount, it should not cover more than a third of the people in the live stream, so that if everybody tries to buy, basically, if you have a relatively cheap item with a high conversion rate, well, some people are going to have fear of missing out and have to buy right as soon as possible so they get to benefit from the discount. And there are some cases where you might run a live stream which is not multi-brand, or which is not about a lot of products. But in this case, you have to make sure that you have to make it stand out by providing an experience which is very customized for the brand. So it cannot be only about sales if you're talking about just one brand. You have to visit the factories of the brand, the showroom of the brand, interview the founders. There are a lot of influencers who are located outside of mainland China and who could visit your factories, your brand, and provide a very interesting content, which also you can reuse maybe in the future on some advertising campaigns. So this is something you have to keep in mind. So another question you might have is, once you decided to work with influencers on WeChat by this process of gifting, paid campaigns, live streaming, how do you find influencers? So a place you can start is a platform called neurank.cn, which is very efficient in terms of sourcing influencer data. You can use it in order to look for influencers in specific categories, and you will be able to easily identify the biggest influencers in your vertical. Another thing you can use this platform for is, if you identified an existing influencer, it can give you a very easy look at all of the data. So you can see some graphs about the number of followers, the number of reads, how it's been evolving, and this can help you check consistency of the data and quality of the influencer. So talking about quality, there are a lot of red flags you might be looking for in order to avoid working with fake influencers. One thing you can ask is a picture of how the reads of the articles evolve over time. Usually when people use robot views, fake views, they will have to have a spike in views, because most of the robots are not sophisticated enough to really have these views evolve in organic, natural ways. So you will see spike in views, which will reveal the fact that the influencer has at least some of its following, which is fake. Usually, most influencers who would successfully manage to fool you don't have 100% fake. So you're looking for influencers who might have 30%, 50% of their following, which is not real. And you want to be on the lookout for that, because you might still want to work with this influencer because a lot of people do that. But then you will need to have a discount on the pricing, because the price you pay should be for the real followers, not for the fake. So this is something you need to look into. Another thing you can ask influencers is to provide the heat map of the article. This will also help you to decide where to put the action call, because then based on the heat map, you will be able to know what percentage of the users will reach the action call with your product, if it's at the beginning of the article or if it's at the bottom. And this will also maybe help you negotiate the price depending on how the influencer is structuring the promotion. This heat map is available for all WeChat official accounts. So if they have it by default, you can just ask them to take a screenshot of the WeChat official backend. And you can also look at the sources of followers from the articles. So it should be a mix of people coming from the official account followers directly, because this shows that a lot of people are interested in reading the article, but you should also have a significant number of people coming from WeChat moments or from shares to friends, because this shows that the articles have some kind of viral dimension to them, that they are very shareable and engaging. If all of the views are coming from one channel, this will be suspicious in terms of the quality of the influencer. And if we summarize a bit more, I know it's a complicated table to read. What are the criteria to select a good influencer? These are some rules of thumb you can use. So first, in terms of the price of the influencer, most of the influencers we work with for our clients are priced between 10,000 to 80,000 RMB per campaign. So this is 1,500 to 12,000 US dollars, more or less. And this is where we find we get the best return on investment. Below that, they're too small. They don't really have enough influence to generate conversions. Above that, they become too expensive and usually overpriced because they're already very popular. And then they are used more for PR, less for conversion rates. And we see the return on investment drop because they become too pricey for the sales they generate. In terms of article views, this means somewhere between 5,000 to 80,000 views per article, open rate between 1 to 10%. This can very vary depending on the influencer. Percentage of article likes, which is more than 0.1% of the views. The top comment should have around 0.03 to or 0.05 to 0.3% of the total like amount. Comments should be diverse in terms of content. Comment rate should be somewhere between 0.01 and 0.1%. Ask about how other brands have been doing in terms of conversion data. As I said, make sure that traffic source, how view, and heat map make sense. They don't reveal any kind of issues we talked about previously. Look at past advertisers. So in particular, look at, did some advertisers work repeatedly with this influencer? If you can see the same promotion, maybe spaced by a few months, 6 months, 9 months with the same influencer, this is strongly indicative of very high quality influencer. Original content, and of course, always work with doing gifting first, so that you can get a sense of the fit of the product with the influencer and whether or not they're going to expose it for free before you go for a paid campaign. So it's a lot of rules, and it's not even exhaustive, but this gives you a sense of the kind of logic you need to have in mind when you're selecting influencers to work with your brands, and the kind of strategy you can use to find them. Before moving to Douyin, I'm going to look at the question panel again. Susanna Ramirez is asking, what do you mean by seeding? By seeding, I mean gifting products to influencers in exchange for free exposure. YY is asking, where can the KOL find the heat map or the reader distribution graph on their WeChat dashboard? This should be in the content analytics section of the WeChat dashboard. Sorry, I'm reading the questions. Tian Yong is asking, what are the main KPIs that we consider for the ROI of KOL campaigns? the main KPI is sales, because all of the other KPIs might be faked, but sales is the one which we know can't be faked. For Elena Martin Ruz is asking, for KOL vetting, do you recommend working with the platforms directly? I've been advised to proceed this way as it may help with more transparent fees. Not really. I think the easiest way is actually to work outside the platforms, because the platforms usually don't have a ROI-driven approach. They have more of a PR-driven approach, because the platforms are used to working with a lot of very, very big brands, which are much less ROI focused, because they have a lot of purchasing channels which are not directly from the campaigns themselves. They mostly want to put the word out. So I would recommend against working with the platforms. In some cases, it can make sense if you have some very specific kind of collaboration you want to develop with the platform, because you have some very specific content or things like that. But if you're just running KOL campaigns, I would say it's better to do it either yourself or through an agency. Mike Fung is asking, does KOL work on success rate, remunerations, or profit sharing? Very often it's pure flat fees, but with a lot of KOLs, you can see a mix. So you might have some KOLs which are going to charge, let's say, 20%, 20,000 RMB, so $3,000 plus 30% commission. This is, for instance, actual pricing from one of the largest KOLs, Becky Lee, from one of her accounts. You can see this kind of distributions. Very often it's pure flat fees, so it would just be like $10,000 for the campaign. But sometimes, if your product is attractive enough, you might be able to negotiate a mix of flat fee plus commission. Very rarely you will get pure commission. Usually you can get pure commission if you work with very small influencers, which can be interesting, but then it's a lot of work to generate all of these influencers, to find all of these influencers and arrange all of these campaigns, given the fact that each of these campaigns might just sell 2, 3, 4 products, not more than that. But in this case, you can have pure commission based with very low commissions, which can be somewhere between 15 to 30%. Is engaging influencer more cost effective or advertising on WeChat? So it's clearly more cost effective to use influencers if you want to generate sales. If you want to generate exposure, then advertising might be cheaper, but I don't really see the point of exposure which won't convert. How do we set up mini programs within WeChat? Cecilia, this you can write to us if you have questions after the call. It's basically WeChat mini programs are generated from official accounts. So you need to create an official account first. We can guide you to do that. It's an administrative process. So I don't want to describe it here because it will be too general. Yeah, write to us and we'll let you know. What are the base level costs of a WeChat store setup? I would say around $10,000 to set up everything for the first year. Right now we're providing discount because of coronavirus to support merchants. So depending on the size of the brand, it could be a bit cheaper if we create some discounts for you. But this is roughly what we charge if you do it with us. Okay, there are still a lot of questions, about 50 of them. So I'm gonna get back to the questions later. But there is a lot of ground I want to cover before the end of the presentation. So I will first talk about Douyin, Kuaishou, and Tmall, and then I will get back to the questions. I only answered 8 of them among 58. So I don't know if I will be able to cover all of them, but I'd like to first finish the content and then I move on to Q&A. Otherwise, we're gonna spend the rest of the hour on Q&A. So Douyin, as I said, is a Chinese version of TikTok. It has 400 million daily active users. These active users are mostly in large cities in China, what we call tier 1 cities, cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and they're very young, as we said. 40% of them are 24 to 30. So this is really a platform to target a rather young audience. And the platform has really been booming. As you can see, it almost doubled its number of daily active users in just a year. So it's very different from what we were seeing earlier with WeChat, which only saw a slight increase in a couple of years. And an interesting thing with Douyin is it also has e-commerce integration, which works in a way which is a bit different from WeChat. There are two systems for Douyin. You can create your store within Douyin, within the platform, or you can link to Taobao or Tmall. You can create external links. So both options are possible. Usually there is a little link at the bottom of a video. If the user watched the entire video and the video loops, then the link will get much bigger, will become a big card that people can click. And then it will take people to a kind of landing page for the product, and then to Taobao or to the buy now page on Douyin. The sales of Douyin have been growing quite fast. They're not as big in terms of live streaming sales as what you might have on Taobao. So Taobao live streaming reached 250 billion renminbi in 2019. Kuaishou, which we will talk about later, which is another short video platforms, got to 150 billion renminbi, and Douyin quadrupled to 40 billion renminbi. So it's not the biggest, but it's still significant in terms of volume. So you can create a store on Douyin very easily if you have a company in China. You can do, or even if you're an individual, just by clicking a few buttons and providing a Chinese ID, a Chinese phone number, and a business license in China. Douyin will charge commission for the sales. They will vary between 2% to 10%, depending on the category. I won't detail this now, but this gives you can quickly look at where you are on this chart. And I will share the slides once again, so you will have all of this data available after the presentation. So as I said, one of the problems with Douyin is that it's mostly used to promote very cheap articles. So although the ROIs can be interesting, between 150 to 250% on average, they are usually good for products which are really, really cheap. You can see in these case studies, usually a lot of like beauty-related products, an exfoliating gel, a spray mask, and a lipstick. The products are actually below 100 RMB or around 100 RMB, and this is the type of products which is performing on Douyin, which are below $15 or $20 USD. And that's the kind of the limitation of the platform. As we said, it's cheap to get visibility on Douyin. It's harder to sell products which are below a certain price point, and that's the weakness of the platform. But as I said, it's great for exposure. So you can create an account for your brand. It's very hard for brands outside China to create accounts on Douyin. It's possible, but it's a very complicated process. If you're interested, you can reach out to us and we can see whether or not it will be possible in your case. But it's a bit of a struggle. It's very limited. But once you have this brand account, then you will be ranked higher in search. You will be able to link to download for an app, to an e-commerce landing page, and you will be able to start challenges. So to ask people to take specific videos with specific stickers or specific music and specific topics, and in order to get rewards if they get enough exposure. So this is a great way to create engagement. Another thing with Douyin is that their advertising system is one of the cheapest on the market, except for Kuaishou. So the cost per install, if you're promoting an app on Douyin, is around $1, which is extremely cheap. And this is about twice cheaper than if you are using all of the advertising system from Tencent. So we're not even talking about WeChat ads here. If you look at, compared to the cheapest ads you might find on Tencent, on platforms like Tencent News or Tencent Videos, they're still twice more expensive than the advertising on Douyin. And this is very efficient to provide advertising for games or applications. Because as we said, it's going to be hard for you to get sales on Douyin for most of the products you might want to sell. But if you are looking for something which does not require a purchase, just requires an install, then it's a perfect platform in order to promote. In terms of influencers, as we said, the cost per influencer for Douyin is quite cheap. The number of you will get 15 times more impressions on Douyin than you would get on WeChat by spending the same amount. The problem, as we said, is that it will be much harder to generate e-commerce sales from this if your product is not extremely cheap. So if you're looking for impressions, visibility, PR, very, very good platform. If you're looking for sales, as of today, it might not be the best. It will be a long-term investment. I am expecting that people will buy more and more expensive products on Douyin, but today is really early stage. So it would be more about building a following that you would sell to later, because the cost of acquisition of the platform is still quite low before the platforms become mature like WeChat. WeChat also used to have WeChat Pay used to be used only for very small transactions, and now it evolved to very large transactions to the point that people are buying cars on WeChat. But this took some time, and it is the same for Douyin. Today, it's more about user acquisition. Tomorrow, it might be about sales. Another thing you can do on Douyin and another platform called Xiaohongshu, Red, you might have heard of it, is working with key opinion customers. So small influencers on or key opinion customers on Douyin and Xiaohongshu are getting much more traction than they might get on WeChat or other platforms. WeChat is mostly a top-down platform, so it's a platform which is basically big brands talking to customers. Douyin and Xiaohongshu are bottom-up platforms. So there are platforms where content is mostly generated by users, and if the content gets viral, it can go really big, even if the user doesn't have a lot of followers. So if you gift your product to 100 people, you might have 4 or 5 of these posts about your product, which might get very viral and get you much more exposure than if you had spent the same amount of money on very large influencers. So it's very, very efficient on Douyin and on Xiaohongshu to do gifting, to do product seeding, to very small influencers, what we call KOCs, key opinion customers, for this reason. Because the KOCs on Douyin or Xiaohongshu have a real chance to become very viral. Of course, you're kind of trying spaghetti on a wall. You're trying with a lot of them. A lot of them might just have a few likes, like 10, 20, but a few of them might get into the 100 or even thousands, even if they have almost no followers, because of the power of the algorithms of the platforms. And if you look at some brands like Perfect Diary, which is a very, very big China beauty brand, you can see the way they spend money on influencers is really a lot of small influencers, and then the bigger the influencers, the smaller the number. And even if they spend more on the bigger ones, it remains extremely efficient to go for those small ones. So it's kind of this pyramid approach you have to influencers, where you're spending a lot, you're recruiting a lot of small influencers because they will have a lot of impact in aggregate, and you might work with a couple, 1 or 2 really big ones in order to create some kind of halo effect, which will help with your campaign. I won't take the questions on Douyin right now, maybe because there are too many questions in the backlog right now. So I will quickly talk about Kuaishou advertising and Tmall, and then I will take all the questions at the same time. This way I can address everything which has been asked, and the people who want the answers to the question can stay. Other people will have had the full presentation. So Kuaishou is very similar to Douyin. You will be hard pressed to tell the difference between the two interfaces. It is gigantic in terms of traction. It has more than 300 million daily active users, and people spend a lot of time on the platform, more than 17 minutes on average per user per day. Of course, it's not necessarily the same people using Douyin and Kuaishou. So people don't start the day by spending 70 minutes on Kuaishou and then spend 88 minutes on Douyin. Usually it's different user bases, but both platforms have very high engagement rates. It's been growing incredibly fast, also doubling in size in just a year to 300 million active users. It has a different population than Douyin. It is also a very young population, but it is located in very different places compared to Douyin. When we were talking about Douyin, we mentioned that 23% of their users were in tier 1 cities. This number is only 10% for Kuaishou. So very few users in very large cities. On the other hand, 34% of the users are in tier 4 cities and below, so in very small cities in China. So if you want to reach a more rural, I would say, but at least non-mainstream, non-main cities population in China, it is a better platform. It also has a lot of display advertising options, as we said, it's also a very powerful e-commerce platform. We mentioned that the live streaming sales on Kuaishou are about 4 times higher than the ones on Douyin, and the cost of advertising is even cheaper than what you might have on Douyin. So if you're promoting apps or games, once again, Kuaishou is very good for that because it has such a cheap cost of advertising. It would be even cheaper than what we had on Douyin. We saw that Douyin was twice cheaper than the cheapest Tencent advertising formats, and Kuaishou can be up to 3 times cheaper than Douyin. CPI is cost per installation, so it's the cost to have one app installed by advertising. CPC is a cost per click, is how much you pay for a click on the platform, and these are all very, very, very affordable numbers. So very powerful for display advertising. As I said, I would not use WeChat for display advertising. I would use it for influencers to get sales. If you want to get visibility and if you want to get installed for games, things which are not purchase driven, then you have to use Kuaishou or Douyin. And if you look at the way people spend influencer money on Kuaishou and Douyin, you can see a lot of it is spent in cosmetics, a very, very popular category on both platforms. Other than that, fashion, games, F&B are all very, very popular categories. Everything which is very visual, as like food and fashion, is very popular because these platforms have this short video platform format, which is ideal for very, very visual items. I'm sorry already because I'm already running over time by 1 minute. I have a very small section on Tmall, which I will go through. Don't worry, it's very, very quick overview of an interesting way to list on Tmall, and then I will start to take questions. There are still more than 400 of you here, so thanks for your patience up to this point. So Tmall, as I said, is one of the largest e-commerce platforms in China. It has 700 million annual active customers. They sold $38 billion of products during Singles Day 2019. So this is where people go to really buy products, much more so than any other platforms. As a foreign brand selling on Tmall, you have a few ways to go. So you can go Tmall Classic. So in this case, you need to set up a company in China. You need to have a warehouse in China. Your products need to be imported to China under general trade, which might be a limitation if you have a product which might be not doesn't do animal testing, which is required for China, or something which can only be sold cross-border. And you will be paying import tariff plus the Chinese VAT. Another option you have is setting up a cross-border store on Tmall. So there is a solution from Tmall called Tmall Global. In this case, you don't need to set up a company in China. You can have a warehouse outside of China. You have a few options to ship through Tmall Global. I won't detail them here. And you will pay a tax rate of 9.1%, which is pretty much a flat rate, except on most categories except cosmetics. And then you have TOF, which is called the abbreviation of Tmall Oversea Fulfillment. And this actually is an interesting solution I want to talk a bit more about because it's a way to list on Tmall without investing too much. In this case, you would basically have your products listed on an existing Tmall store, which is operated by Tmall directly. So it's a bit like if Tmall is literally a mall, and you have, if you go for Tmall Classic or Tmall Global, you have your own store inside this mall. And if you have on TOF, then it means that inside this mall, there's a supermarket and your product is on the shelf of the supermarket. So you don't have your own store, but your product is listed, people can buy it. It's just harder to promote than if you have your Tmall global store, but it's much cheaper. And once you're listed on TOF, you can use that to run campaigns on Douyin. We mentioned that it's very hard for brands to open store on Douyin because it's hard for foreign accounts to be created on Douyin. But if you're listed on TOF, then you could create links between influencer campaigns and your TOF products, which would enable to generate sales. So it makes your product searchable via Taobao.com or Tmall. It enables some easy linking, as I said, from some social media apps which have integration with Tmall, like Douyin and Weibo. And the costs are very limited. It's a 10,000 USD deposit, but you can also avoid it if you set up through a partner. So for instance, we have an account on TOF, so we can help you list your product on TOF, in which case you will not have to pay the deposit. And then you have some warehousing fees to pay. So the first 6 months, it's 0.71 euros per cubic meter, which is pretty affordable. And then if you leave your products more than 6 months, then it will become very expensive because they are trying to avoid people keeping the products which don't sell. Basically, the idea is this should be fast moving. And a lot of one of the opportunities for that is to be able to use Tmall live streaming. So a lot of even WeChat influencers have been moving to live streaming, especially during the COVID-19 epidemic, because a lot of brands cut their marketing budgets during the epidemic. So in order to make a living, a lot of influencers moved to commission-based campaigns. And this Michu, for instance, who's a very large WeChat influencer, did the live streaming on Tmall for the first time on March 8th, generated 91,000 orders, 10 million RMB of products sold. This is about 1.5 million RMB of sales. So there is a growth, very fast growth of live streaming on Tmall, and listing on Tmall Global or TOF can give you access to this because once you're listed, influencers can create links to your products. Another example, very recent, is from the largest host, Via, which sold 164 million RMB of product, $23 million in one live stream during what's a special festival, which was Via Beauty Day, Meli Day. So very large volume, but very small average order, only $27 US. But once again, as in the case of Douyin, you can see a shift. People are starting with cheap items on all channels, and it's moving in general toward bigger and bigger tickets. And the last thing I want to mention on Tmall is that it works very well in combination with WeChat. So if you have WeChat and Tmall working together, that's when you really leverage the total ecosystem of China. So one brand which is really good at that is Home Facial Pro. So they would use WeChat to do a product announcement. Then the people would flood to Tmall, and in order to participate to a pre-sale, all the people who participate to the pre-sale might get some gift. If they want to track the special gifts they're getting during the pre-sale, then they have to go back to WeChat in order to track the delivery of the gift bag. This is a perfect way to go from WeChat to Tmall. So you bring your WeChat users to Tmall, and then you also go from Tmall to WeChat. So you force some of the Tmall users who might not be your WeChat followers yet, you give them a reason to go back to WeChat in order to get something they would not get otherwise. It can be access to a lucky draw. It can be tracking or other things they could do on WeChat but not on Tmall. And you have to have this permanent move from WeChat to Tmall, from Tmall to WeChat, so you can create long-term engagement on both platforms. And so you can make sure that even if they're not easily linked, you leverage both platforms at best. And of course, when they ship the product, they put some QR code on the products. People can scan the products, and if they scan the QR code on the product, they get some additional coupon for the next purchase. So you have this back and forth because then after they follow the account, they will be notified of the next product release, and the loop keeps going. Concluding remarks before I go to question, and once again, I'm so sorry for spending so much time going through all of these slides. There are some other channels to keep in mind. I want to quickly explain why I did not mention them. So I didn't mention Baidu for the reasons I mentioned. It is kind of dying out in terms of a marketing channel. Xiaohongshu, very powerful, as I said, for seeding, gifting, but not very good for sales conversions. That's why I didn't include it in this talk about e-commerce. Weibo, same, is very good for affordable impressions or sometimes for retargeting of Tmall visitors, but it has decreasing levels of engagement. So I would say if you're not running a Tmall store, it's less interesting as a channel if you're not started yet on Tmall. Bilibili started as a manga-focused video channel, but is becoming increasingly popular for F&B and cosmetic promotions. I would actually keep this one in mind. I didn't talk about it because it's a bit smaller than the other channels we talked about. And Zhouhu, another good platform, which is very good to target male, highly educated, and older audience. 50% of the users are more than 30 years old, which is very rare for a digital platform in China. But it's a smaller platform, so this is why I did not describe it in detail today. So as a conclusion, so China is already past the epidemic peak, and social campaigns can be a great way to get started on this market. WeChat growth is slowing down, but it's still the best channel if you have high-priced items. So it's still a go-to platform. Although you should also keep your eye on Douyin and Kuaishou. They are the fastest-growing channels today in China. Today, the sales are mostly low-cost items, but you can work on follower acquisition today. And as people will buy more and more expensive items on Douyin and Kuaishou, then you will be able to reap the benefits from this investment. And listing on Tmall remains essential in the long run. It's still the biggest e-commerce platform in China. And if you want to get started without spending $1 million in a flagship store, TOF, Tmall Oversea Fulfillment, can be a very good way to get started. Thanks a lot, everyone, for the patience. Now I'm going to move to Q&A. We still have 390 people here, so pretty good. I'm going to check the chat, see what's going on. I'm going to go through some of the questions now. So let's go. Start from the end. Is TOF only for overseas brands? It is for only for overseas brand. It's a part of Tmall Global. Basically, it's a specific store within Tmall Global. You talked about warehouse costs. Is that in China or? Oops, sorry. Sorry, answering another question. What about Jingdong? If we're talking about luxury products, wine, what is the most relevant online platform? So Jingdong is much smaller for most categories. If you're talking about luxury products, I would say WeChat, maybe combined with Tmall on the long run. JD is good for kind of day-to-day purchase or electronics. But if you're looking for anything like apparel or cosmetics or things like that, you will want to go for a combination of WeChat, Tmall, and maybe Douyin and Kuaishou. Sebastian is asking, you talk about warehouse costs. Is that in China or overseas? This is overseas. So usually the cost I gave was for the Tmall warehouse in Europe, which I think is in the Netherlands, but I'm not 100% sure. But it would be similar cost if you were to use another of their warehouses. Jackson is asking, TOF, other than the 10K deposit, what are the other costs of setting up? There is no other cost except if you need design or other operations. The nice thing with TOF is that there is no setup cost. That being said, it's a consignment model. So the Tmall team, as they sell, will keep quite a significant percentage of your sales, usually around 40%. Elisa K is asking what's the best platform for B2B. For B2B, there is another platform which is called Yalibaba 1688, which is operated by Tmall, by Alibaba, and which is it's a B2B platform for mainland China, and we are actually setting up now clients on it. It's a very, very powerful platform for B2B, and it is the best platform for B2B. If you do B2B communication, then you might want to look at the platform I just mentioned, Zhouhu, the Q&A platform, and yeah, and that may be a combination of other niche platforms. Maria Luisa Aziz asking, do you have a trustable KOL agency to suggest? We do KOL sourcing, so you can ask that to us directly, and we'll be happy to help. Continue on the questions. I'm gonna restart from the top. Sorry, I'm just reading the questions. Marc-André is asking, I have a WeChat business account. I can only do 5 publications per month. This is normal. It's normal. As I said, for service accounts, it's a very visible account, but can only publish 4 publications per month. We will receive a copy of this presentation. Yes. Asking where am I based? Does WeChat mostly help companies from outside of China to enter the market? I'm based in Beijing, and yes, that's what we do. So it's a lot of questions. I'm trying to find the ones which are relevant for as many people as possible to answer. There are around 80 questions right now in the backlog, so it's a lot. Okay. One other question was, in what months do you expect year-to-date sales to exceed same time 2019? So as I said, this already happened in March. Some of these questions are already answered, so I'm just clicking them out so I can move to the next ones. Is the trend for travel outbound the same as your predictions? So travel, of course, is being impacted much more than other sector. I don't really have visibility for travel. Toddy is asking, to what extent did the increase of sales in March due to shift from retail e-commerce? So there's a lot to that, and you can see if you look at the data I showed, the brands which are pure online brands did not grow as fast because their sales were already coming from online. That being said, the pure online brands like Perfect Diary still saw a very significant increase of sales of 20–30%. And the offline brands like Estée Lauder, Lancôme, so increase of more than 100% because in this case there was really a shift from offline to online. Michael Shaw is asking, how would you position WeChat stores? I think I explained this very clearly. Very something you would use to sell more pricey items and high-end items. And I will just spend 2 minutes to look for the most interesting questions I can answer, and then I will just close because I'm already over time. And to be honest, it's more than 11 p.m. So I'm running out of gas here, and I'm starting to fall asleep on this webinar. So I will just look for a few questions I might want to answer because they would be particularly interesting, and then I will close the webinar. So there's a question from Marianne, which is, do mini stores directly link to brand existing e-commerce stores? So they don't. So mini stores are really inside WeChat, a separate ecosystem, and that's why they are so optimized. We actually have an integration between WeChat stores and Shopify, for instance, or Magento. So we enable brands to synchronize the existing e-commerce stores with WeChat stores, but they are different. They are different ecosystems completely. Stefan is asking, what is the difference between WeChat mini program and WeChat stores like Yodzan? So Yodzan is just one type of WeChat store, and you can create, it's a provider. It's a bit like if you look at e-commerce website, you might have providers like Shopify and Magento, and we are actually a provider of WeChat store. So you might have to pick between Yodzan if you have a company in China, or Walk the Chat if you are looking for something which is outside China with cross-border payments and integration with Shopify or Magento. And my phone is asking, is influencers the only way to sell? As a new company, the costs are exorbitant and unaffordable. They are the best way to sell. And the cost of entering the Chinese market is high. So it's I know it's very expensive to pay 4, 5, 10,000 USD for an influencer campaign, but you don't really have a way around it, unfortunately. As I said, if you go on the Tmall way, you'll be looking at $1 million in investment. But if you are going to WeChat, it's going to be dozens of thousands of US dollars, which is going to be comparatively cheap. If you can't spend this money, maybe you should focus more on your home market and move to China later, because I think it's very difficult to enter the Chinese market if you don't have at least something like 50,000 US dollars to invest during the first 3 to 6 months, because China is just an expensive market to get in. Are KOL in China happy to accept free gifts rather than payment? Not so much, not as much as in the West. So when you do free gift, some of influencers might provide exposure, but a lot of them won't. So that's one of the risks of one of the differences between China and the West, is that free exposure is much harder to get. It's still important in the life cycle of collaboration with influencers, but it is not as easy to get free exposure as you might have with a YouTube influencer or Instagram influencer. I think, yeah, and you ask another question asking, do we help on which KOL to seed? Yeah, we do that. You don't need to find another agency to do that. You can reach out to us. And yeah, I think I will leave it at that, if you don't mind. It's been a long presentation already. We're already 20 minutes over time, and as I said, I'm kind of running out of energy after all of this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Especially if you have any feedback, especially if you didn't enjoy it, most likely if you didn't enjoy it, you're already gone. But if you have any feedback, please let us know, because and especially, what would you have liked me to talk about? Are there some things you would like to have deep dive for future presentations? Would love to hear about that. I'll ask this question anyway in an email, and I will also put the slides to the webinar so you have everything. The presentation is recorded. I'm not sure whether or not we'll make this recording available. I will look at it. I will look at how good I look in the recording. If I look good, I might share it. If I look as exhausted as I feel, then most likely I will keep it for myself. But we'll see about that, and there will be other webinars organized in the next couple of weeks. So that's it. Thanks everyone for the time, and yeah, let us know if we can do anything to help. If you have any questions, things that you would like us to talk about in the future. Bye bye everyone. Take care.